I had a good sense of humor. All right, 3 basic types of wastegates. We started covering those. We had the fixed type, which is just bolt. And how do you adjust it? You really don't. Okay. And then the manually operated, which was either a push-pull that was connected direct to the throttle cable, and or one that was separate on that. And I gotta be honest, so as I was talking yesterday, I was thinking, and then I forgot about it until just now, the manually operated interconnected. And then I was thinking, I wonder how that would actually, how you would rig that up, since I've never rigged one up. And I have to admit it in front of you, I don't know. So when you jam the throttle forward, I don't think you want the wastegate to start closing off. I think you'd want it the opposite. So like in the mid-range, they're both kind of mid-open. And then as you mash go forward on the throttle, I think you'd have to open the wastegate more to let more out, more exhaust bypass the turbo, because if you open the throttle and close the wastegate, that means max engine power, max exhaust to the turbo. That's probably not the way you'd want to do it. You got to start backing off on that wastegate as the engine starts blowing up. But then again, as you start climbing, you're going to need it. So I don't know. Take off at half throttle. There you go. And as you climb, maybe that's the way it works. Okay, let's see. Manually operated. All right, that brings us to number 3. Let me see. 1, 2. Make sure I wrote all the notes there. Let me see. 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay. Yep. Now to point number 3. Point I. All right. Or so we had fixed, manual, and oil controlled. This is going to be your automatic type. So it is piston operated. Piston operated. Now let's go back to the picture, and I shall refresh your memory, providing I can find it. Let me see. There it is. I said from current slide, yet it didn't do it. All right. So the wastegate is now, it's an oil-controlled wastegate. And this would be in its relaxed position, is wide open. So you get in the airplane and you turn the master on. The engine's not running. What is this telling the turbo to be in? What position?
On.
So wide open is waste. So waste. Turbo off. So it's going to be off. And then when you start the engine up, oil pressure will start building up through the engine, build up through here, go through this outlet, oil outlet port controller is what it says, through a line into the controllers that we're going to talk about. And as long as oil is allowed to come into here and flow out with no restrictions, this will stay open. So in order to close it, we're going to block off some restrictions and start blocking up, build up pressure in here and start closing this up. Follow? All right. Not just saying that to make me good. So piston operated, oil pressure is fed into a piston at all times. So oil is fed into the wastegate and presses on piston. Pick a sub point. Oil is always, assuming the engine's on, always flowing to wastegate. And I just make that distinction to say that there is nothing between the engine and the wastegate that ever stops the oil from flowing. It's always going to the wastegate. Let me see. Well, my sentence is that oil pressure builds, wastegate is closed. So, but not as. How about? That's not what I wanted at all. we could say if oil outlet from wastegate is blocked by a controller, that's its job. Oil pressure builds up. Oil pressure builds up and wastegate closes. And when the wastegate closes, that is turbo on. All right. When oil is allowed to bleed off by controllers, I put controllers because sometimes there's more than one. Usually there is. By control, wastegate closes. And turbo, I just put, I need and turbo is off. Wait, did I screw up? Wheels allowed to bleed off, controllers, wastegate. Oops, sorry. Opens. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Gotta watch my this. It gets kind of crazy going back and forth. The position of the wastegate, position of wastegate is infinitely variable. So it's not like a binary thing. It's either open or closed. It's somewhere in the middle, just like a throttle. Except it's never all the way open and it's never all the way closed. I shouldn't say it that way. But it's kind of that way.
It's never completely.
I mean, it's never completely open. There's still going to be some restriction. You got a butterfly in it no matter what. So even if it's this way, there's still.
Yeah, that's why I shouldn't say it's never all the way because it'll open. But what is the word I want to use here? It is, let me look at the picture. It is, so this is fully open. So we'll go fully open, but it's never fully closed. It's never fully closed for a couple reasons. One, you do not want this butterfly making contact with this wall here because of the heat of expansion and everything else. So it is never fully closed. It could stick in the closed position, which at the closed position, remember it's turbo on, it's sending all the gas to the turbo. It is never fully open because in order for it to be fully open, that means this piston has to be all the way up here against this stop, and it's never fully open because, let me go back one more time, never fully open because in order for it to be fully open, this piston has to be all the way over here to the left, and that means that something here is completely blocking the oil passage. And if you completely block this oil passage, then this oil is just going to sit in there, and this is part of the exhaust system. This right here is 1200, 1500 degrees. You're going to get oil coking. So you do not want your oil to coke up in there. So oil is always flowing to keep the oil from overheating. So that is two reasons why it is never fully closed. One, I've read that that's just bad to have that butterfly hitting right there. So it's always, it kind of comes near it. And then as far as fully open goes, fully open is kind of a relative term. It's never in a position to completely stop the turbo from spinning. Because if the turbo stops spinning, you're still going to have exhaust gases going through and at least hitting the side of it. Now you get uneven heating, which will cause warpage and then cracking. So that's what I want to say here. So wastegate is never fully closed, and turbo is never fully stopped. That's accurate. So if it was fully closed, it could coke because the oil's not flowing. And so while we're on that subject, oil cokes at 300 degrees C or 575 degrees F. And also, I don't want to throw this in here. I told you the other day, this is why people turbos, they let everything cool down for a long period of time, right? So you want to cool down the turbocharger because when we shut it down, the oil just stops. Same thing about the wastegate. Oil is just going to stop, but according to the drawing, it's also going to push all the oil out. But still, we want to make sure. This is why cool down periods are important. This is why cool down periods are important. So with a turbocharger, you want to stop after your flight. You don't want to just land hot, pull off the taxiway and shut down. You got to find a place, park, let it cool down for a while. And let's see.
Is the engine running too fast during your approach to allow it to cool down while you're coming in?
Nobody in here has a twin rating, do they? I think you keep the power up pretty decent on a twin. I'm not totally sure. I have to talk to Phil, but it just depends on your flight, on your flight profile. There are, I don't know, I've seen stuff, watched some videos about engine management. There was one company that had a whole fleet of freight. Freight used to be a big deal. You heard from freight dogs and stuff. It was checks. So back in the olden days, you'd get off work and there would be like all these guys in their cars just sitting there with these bags, and then these planes would just start showing up. Like, what are they doing? Oh, they're hauling checks. So checks are things we used to write at the store and whatnot.
Yeah.
So they literally had to take these checks to the central banks or to wherever they had to take them. And so they all had to be transported, and they were transported by plane. So they would use these light or kind of medium-sized twins, and they would show up. They'd throw a bunch of checks and stuff in there, and every single night, they're all over the place. So if you ever heard the term about freight dogs and stuff, they'd haul freight and checks. But anyway, one of these companies, that was a big thing, and they were talking about their flight profile, and they were concerned about that. So one of the things was they never decreased manifold pressure below a certain point for shock cooling, and so they were more worried about shock cooling. So they kept the power up all the way down, which meant that now they have the cool down period. And so depends on the flight profile. Hopefully that answered the question. So yes, some people come in hot and they don't have a long cool down period. Some people have a very lengthy cool down period. When I descend with my aircraft, I keep the power on. So I try to go for 500 feet per minute. So if I'm up at 12,000 feet, it's kind of cool. Your iPad will tell you, or nicer flight instruments like he has. You just look at it, it knows where you're going, and it'll have feet per minute to descent. So as I'm coming this way, and I'm at 12,000 feet, I start my descent, like Modesto to get into Lodi. And I just put the nose over, and I pick up the speed, and I just hauling ass down. So it's like, why not? And some people pull the power back and then glide that, so the speed doesn't increase. It just depends on how you fly the plane. Some people worry about shock cooling an engine too fast. I've heard people say that's just a false thing. I heard somebody say, and this makes sense, the worst shock cooling you ever do to your engine is shutting it off. So I'm like, I do that every time I fly. All right, if it is fully open, it's not fully open. So if, we'll just go with way ahead. If turbo stops, it is unevenly heated. And this causes stress, which causes cracking and all kinds of bad stuff. My opinion is with these systems, almost everything is kind of maintenance free for the most part. On an annual inspection, what I rather insist on doing is pulling off the air inlet that goes into the turbocharger, inspecting all of the turbo, the compressor, inspect all the compressor fins, spin it by hand, feel it, and evaluate it. You should hear no rubbing, no odd noises, and it spins freely, and it looks fine, and you don't have any major oil leaks. You're good. The wastegate, that thing takes I think it takes more punishment, and it's forgotten about more than anything, because it's got that piston that's got to move. It's got that valve that's now turning inside of exhaust gases, which is just nasty, and so it tends to stick. And so mouse milk is the thing to put on that, and that dissolves. It's supposed to dissolve some of the nastiness, keeps it lubricated. So.
Like in a spray bottle or something, spray it in there.
No, I don't think it comes in an aerosol. You got a squeeze bottle. That's the word. Yeah. I don't know. You probably want mouse milk.
You ever read the label on mouse milk?
Why would I do that? No, tell me about it.
I think it's illegal in California, but it's manufactured here.
It's manufactured here. Do you know how they make it?
Mouses.
Squeeze.
Where's the picture? Oh, there it is.
Right there. You just got the little mice, and that looks like something I took from The Simpsons. I'll write that down later when we get to maintenance, but I just thought I'd mention it while we're at that section. All right, so we covered the piston. Now let's talk about putting this particular wastegate in operation. Now I want to make this simple. It's going to get somewhat complicated, but don't let it. I'm just going to give you some overview of some things, but then we're going to kind of bring it back down to some simple stuff. These systems, like I said, they're weird. And it's almost hard to find really good information about that's what that is. You almost have to go airplane specific and get the airframe manual and learn about that airframe. Then you got to find something that's different, go get that airframe manual. The engine manufacturers, like Continental's a little better about it. It's not the best of information, and a lot of times it conflicts each other. You'll be reading something, and I would take the notes. Okay, this is how the system works. Got it. All right, find another publication. Oh, it's the same thing. Just double check. No, it's the opposite of what that just said. So, okay, cross that one out. Cross that, and you find a third one. Okay, these two agree, but anyway, you get the point. So I'm just going to say that work with me on this one. I'm trying to make it simple and give you the information. The nice thing is I did go to Lycoming school. We did cover a fair amount of this, and I was able to go, okay, yeah, so my notes were correct for as much as I could tell. So automatic systems. Automatic. So we're going to talk about Lycoming first. And each one of them has Lycoming Continental, each has their very different idea of how it works. They each obviously are going to do some things that are similar, but the way they go about doing it is very, very different. So automatic systems are going to use the same basic components. So use same basic components. All of them are going to use the same basic components. And the basic components are going to be, we're going to obviously have a turbocharger. I'm just going to put turbo. We're going to have the wastegate. Every system's going to have a wastegate. Every system's going to have a turbo. And, of course, it's going to have the associated hoses and plumbing. They're all nearly identical in what they're trying to do. So 3. But the Lycoming now is going to use one of 3 systems, more or less. And as I found out recently, you can mix and match these parts. You can get aftermarket parts. They're going to use some of these and do weird things. So, interesting point of this is working in general aviation. Like, number one, when you work on pressurization systems and you have a pressurization problem, everybody says it's the pressure controller, send it in. You take out the pressure controller, call the shop you're going to send it to, and they'll tell you to send it in. But if you kind of circle it around and ask the other way, how often are these things bad? They will tell you almost never. We make a very good living fixing non-broken controllers. It's always something else, as evidenced by the fact they get it, say it's not broken, send it back, you put it in, and guess what? Your problem is still there because it's something else. So you're always looking for some other problem. I remember I was working on one. No, I'm just getting into pressurization. But anyway, I was working on a pressurized bearing. And yeah, the guy said he was flying along and heard a loud pop and the pressurization just didn't work anymore. So, I worked on the airplane. Oh my gosh, I found like it was leaking from everything. It's supposed to have O-rings and all these seals. They're all missing. So I, replaced all the O-rings, found all this stuff. And we were saying, it's the pressure controller. Just send it in. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. So I fixed all this stuff, took it out. It's fun to run up it made me sick actually because you're doing the pressure constantly on the ground. Pressurize it, depressurize it. It was working pretty well. And then the pilot took it and he goes, yeah, because it's working now. But just not quite like it used to, but almost fine. And then what I had missed is there was a boot on one of the, I didn't pull the whole interior out, but if I would have got in there and there was a boot that was around one of the actuators that went to the landing gear, that boot popped off. But anyway, I fixed the whole thing. I didn't send out the controller, and I fixed it. It almost worked. Then when we put the boot on, it's like, damn, this thing really works. So, but my point was, it's the same thing with turbo controllers. They say that they hardly ever give you a problem. They say, number one, do not adjust them unless you really, really know what you're doing, and you have all of the proper calibrated equipment exactly the way the service instructions do. And then secondly, you're going to find they're almost always fine. No, which is nice to know. Okay, so 3 systems. We have the differential pressure controller, and density control. We have the variable pressure. Then we have the slope control. The first one we're going to look at is going to be the differential pressure controller and density controller. So differential, oops. Just follow my notes. Differential / density system. This particular one is used on the TIO 540. I told you it's specific. Alpha 2 Alpha as used on the Piper Navajo. So it's very, very specific. Just so you're aware, it is sea level boosted by 10 inches. So what are we going to see on the manifold pressure gauge? 40. Has a critical altitude of how much?
15,000.
Yeah, of 19,000 feet. And it's 310 horsepower, 290 without turbo. Just, in case you're interested. Not on the test. All right, let's take a look at a picture and see if we can dissect it. Let me see. We had the manual, we got the interconnected, and we got the Lycoming density differential controller. Do you want the light off for a few minutes there? You can do that.
Let's do it.
All right. First thing we're going to do is just get to know our drawing a little bit, take a look around, see what's happening. Engine. Throttle. So this right here is going to be what? Manifold. This right here will be upper deck pressure. Okay, air comes in, goes across the turbo, upper deck pressure, manifold, manifold pressure. Over here, of course, is the exhaust. Exhaust goes across a wastegate. If the wastegate is open, then the turbo is essentially off, and if it's closed, it is essentially on. Okay, so we have two different controllers. One, we'll take a look at the differential pressure controller. The differential pressure controller, like the name implies, it's the difference between two things. And you can just look at the colors. It's the difference between upper deck and manifold. You're going to see this a lot. I think that this is possibly the most important controller. Actually, it should be three controllers here. Should be a third thing. I believe there should be a pop-off. All right. Doesn't show it. So anyway, this is a really important one, and I'll write this stuff down. If your difference between these two gets too great, then you get oscillations in an aircraft that's very difficult to manage. Because what happens is a little tiny throttle change can make a big difference in the manifold. So, for example, you're trying to go from 34 to 35 inches, or actually more, 34 to 30, 35, 34, just trying to drop it by 1 inch. It's really hard to do because the pressure is so great. So you misshoot a little bit, and then it's going to go up, and it's going to go down, and so you got to have that. Also, they say that with the very, very high differences between there, you're subject to that bootstrapping effect, which is where a little bit of change over here is going to create a change here, which then has an immediate effect over here, which is going to cause this to get higher, which is going to cause this to get higher, which causes that to get higher, and just keeps running on. So I think they could have called it a run-on thing. So you want to limit this pressure so that it's not so great. And it also makes sense. Your turbo doesn't have to work as hard. If I only need to boost 1 inch across here, why have 10 inches over to here and have to break it down, too much over here? So it stays reasonably close. So the way that works,
Question?
Yeah.
To make a difference cause oscillating, can you give an example of that?
well, what will happen is the engine will start to accelerate too much, so you'll pull back, and then it'll go too far the other way. So you're trying to correct it, and it'll go too far this way, and you correct it. You're hunting back and forth for what you're looking for. You're never going to find it. Very manifold's unstable. Much better way to put it. I wanted this. All right. Hang on. I think. Sorry, I thought the next picture was a bigger. It's not a big deal how it works. It's actually quite simple, and that's the wonderful thing about this. We know how this stuff works. We get oil pressure. I'm looking for the oil pressure start here. Let me see. Oil pressure. Engine oil pressure comes from the engine, and the first thing it hits is the wastegate. And if we block the output, the wastegate will close. Okay. So, but that's not here. So we're going to follow it around. And so these are the drains. These two controllers are the drains. If I lock and close both of these, because they are in parallel, meaning they each can do their own thing. I'm going to go back out. If I block, if this density controller goes, no, I'm not happy, I want more turbo, it'll block its port. And if this one over here says, yeah, I don't think so, I overrule that, we've got too much of a difference between these two, I want to open, it's allowed to open, and oil drains off from here. It's got a path, it comes through here, and it drains off. And when this drains off, this starts to open up. That's a hard one. I was going to say close. It starts to open up, turning the turbo off. But if this one is saying, no, I'm happy with what we got, and the density controller says, I'm not happy with what we got, then it has its ability to open up and start closing this off and getting a little more turbo. Wait a minute. Why is there not a path there? It's oil to there. It's there. It's just not colored. This one's off for some reason. That's why. So do you follow? So each one gets to decide. What? Or both.
How's it controlled?
How's what?
Like it's going to the density controller, and you're getting, it's either closing a port or.
Okay, so here's the differential pressure controller.
Yeah.
It's either draining oil or blocking oil. There's an in between. It could drain a little bit and block, but we'll just, for sake of argument right now, we'll say it's binary. It's either open or close, but it's not. It's got a range of motion. Or yeah, it could open, close, open, close, open, close. Got it. Okay, so open or close, open or close. Follow? Okay, so if they're both closed, then oil comes in here, goes in here. If they're both closed, well, really it can't get any further than that. So if it can't get any further than that, this is going to start moving, and it's going to start.
Okay, so when it closes, pressure builds up on the other side of the wastegate.
Pressure builds up right here and starts moving the wastegate. Starts moving the wastegate to open. So open equals turbo. Everybody agree it's off? Off.
Wait, as pressure builds, it opens the wastegate?
And all right, let's go back one.
So the controllers are open.
Let's go back one. Just remember here. So sometimes I write that. I'll do it this time. So this is its natural state. So if it's blocked, so right there, it's in the open position. So open. So it's normally open.
It's wasting it.
Normally open, wasting.
Flow.
Follow it. So it's normally open, and which means that in its natural restful state, it's normally open, which equals turbo off. I guess we could think about a light switch or switch. When we say the switch is open, the light is off. When the switch is closed, I've never done that before. So turbo is off. So it's natural position. But if we were running the engine now, and oil comes in here, and it builds up, it's going to push that piston the other way, which is going to close it. So pressure equals turbo on. So that means that this has to be blocked or closed. So if we use light switch analogy, closed, on.
Turbo on, yeah. Turbo on, there's no flow, creating the pressure to and then when it's turbo's off, there is flow.
Okay, so again, open, like an open light switch, turbo's off. So if this is open, if this is open, right here, the wastegate itself, so right now we have, if it's open, the turbo is off.
And then there's flow going around.
That means that in order for it to be open, it has to be in its normal position. So it's normally open, and no, it's normally open. So that means that oil is allowed to flow.
Correct.
So if I want to close it, I have to block this off. If I block it, then the turbo closes. Oops.
And what? Yeah, the turbo closes.
Wastegate
Wastegate closes.
Wastegate closed.
And then turbo
equals turbo on. Follow?
What controls the blockage?
What controls the blockage? Very good question. So, what controls the blockage is the controllers. So we have two controllers in this. Let's just say there's one. We'll back up just a little bit and say this system has one controller and one controller only, and we'll say it's the differential pressure controller. We'll say that's the only controller it has. And all it cares about is the difference between these two pressures right here. If the pressure gets the difference between them is too much, in other words, like in this picture, I got the throttle closed, and so I pretty much in idle, and I really don't want a whole lot of pressure in there. Well, I certainly don't want 40 psi on the other side of this, or 40 inches, I should say, not psi, 40 inches on the other side. I do not want 40 here and 10 here. That's not good. That's just, I mean, you barely touch that thing, and it's just going to, too hard to control. So you do not want that. So this differential pressure controller is making sure that it doesn't do that. And I want to say it's like 5. Let me see. I have that exact number.
So for argument's sake,
2 to 4 inches. So we want 2 to 4 inch difference. So that's going to kind of keep, I'll write all this down a little bit. So 2 to 4 inches. That's all. It doesn't want 10 inches in there, 30 inches. It wants to keep it roughly 3 inches difference. And every time it gets more than 3 inches difference, the differential pressure controller, very unhappy. So you get too much pressure difference, then what's going to happen, you can't really tell by the drawing, it's going to open. So let's say it gets to 5 inches. What's going to happen? All right, so it's going to start draining the oil out. So it opens up. Oil starts.
To bring that difference closer to.
Oh, just wait a minute. Its job is to bring it closer, but how's it going to do it? It's going to just drain oil.
Okay.
So it doesn't know anything. You just, you stand there, and if it gets more than 5, more than 4, drain oil.
Yeah.
Right? What does that do? Don't worry about it. Just drain oil.
Yeah.
That's all it knows. And if it gets less than that, then block the oil.
Okay.
All right. So it gets to 5. What's its job? What's its job?
To let oil out.
Let the oil. That's all. So let the oil out. And if it gets, if it gets to, I said it's 2. It gets to 3, then what are you supposed to do?
Stay the same.
You have 2 jobs: drain oil, block oil.
Block oil.
Block oil.
Right.
If it gets to 5,
Drain oil.
drain oil. If it gets less than 5,
Block.
block the oil. Got it?
Oh,
Yes.
That's its job. And then you give it a cookie and a sandwich. Okay. So gets to 5. What's its job?
let it go.
Drain oil. So it opens up. Oil starts draining out. Well, that means over here you lose the block. So that no longer is blocked. So we'll get rid of that. So what happens to the oil here?
Flows.
Starts to flow. What happens to the piston inside there? Starts to retract, which means it is going towards open, which is turbo off. But now it gets back to less than 5. And what are you supposed to do? Block the oil. So it blocks the oil, but it blocks it over here at the controller. Block the oil. So this starts to build up
Pressure.
and starts to move it towards closed. Turbo back on. Got it? Okay. So we've trained our differential pressure controller to do this. And it took a while. The remedial training. Then it calls up. What am I supposed to do when it gets to 5? It's supposed to
Let it out. Drain the oil.
drain. Okay. And see, he's getting it. And then if it gets less than 5, you gotta
Hold on to it.
we gotta hold on to it. All right. So now we can bring in a buddy over here. Well, now let's go with the density controller. And the density controller is gonna kind of sniff the density coming in. And if the density is not enough, then it's just going to do the same thing. If the density is too low, then it's going to say, I'm going to block oil. And if the density gets too high, it's going to drain oil. See, but you can't just do it with one because, I don't know, density controller is kind of stupid about things. It's more like, well, I like my 40 inches over here. So if it's not 40 inches and my density is kind of low, I'm just going to say I want more. It's always sitting there screaming, I want more. I want my 40. Well, it's kind of the meathead of the thing. So if it's not 40, I'm just making up numbers, then it's going to open or close. It's going to block it. I want 40. That's why it's blocked right now. But the differential pressure controller, a little more fine over here. It's kind of like the man versus the woman. We're the meatheads and the women are kind of the smart ones about this. Going, don't be an idiot. You can't go to 40. The thing is at idle. Pay attention. So differential controller is a smart one over here and says, no, calm down, like my wife would. We don't need to do that. I'm opening the drain. So going to drain off. But I want more. Well, you don't get more. So you follow? That's all there is to it. That's how it works.
And then is that the same thing when the density controller blocks?
It's the exact same thing.
When it blocks, the flow is blocked also?
Yes. Okay, but now let's go all the way wide open throttle. Wide open throttle. So if we go wide open throttle, and let's say we got let's say we got 40 inches here, and we've got 39 inches over here. Differential pressure controller says we better block it. We got to be 3 to 5. Is it 3 to 5? Or 2 to 4? Sorry, 2 to 4? It's not. It's the differential controller is saying we need more. I need more. I got to have 2 to 4, but I only got 1. That's not enough. So it's got to block. But density controllers over here going, oh, wait a minute. We're already at 40. That's enough. So what's this one going to do? Drain. So this one starts draining while the differential is going to be locked down. So you see how they're working?
Yeah.
Work together. All right.
Do we know how? Do we have to know how it's sensing air density?
I'm going to show you how. I'll tell you. So, all right, lights. All right, let me see. All right, let's talk about, first thing we'll talk about here, because it's the way I wrote it, is the density controller, even though I talked about it backwards. So density controller. All right, and I wrote these off in my margin here. Limits, max manifold pressure, that can be induced by turbo. Induced by turbo at full throttle. All right, so designed to sense density of air after it passes the compressor before the throttle. Designed to sense density, air density that is, density of air after it passes compressor and before throttle. Also known as, yeah, I call it upper decks. I think some places call it deck or upper deck. Upper deck pressure. So really, its job is always saying full power. We got to be full power over here. So its job is to provide. Quantity of air. Necessary for full power operation. And this would be redundant if I write it. So only designed to meter during full power operation, which is the same thing. I'm not going to write that. During less than full, this is important. So during less than full power, differential controller, the diff controller, will, I'll just put operate wastegate. So in other words, we're a partial throttle. The density control is over. You're screaming, I want more power. So it's going to block oil pressure. And the differential controller is going to say, now, don't be ridiculous. We don't need that. Just wasting energy over there. So stop it, making things difficult. Density controller measures 2 items. And whenever you talk density, it's 2 items. Pressure and temperature. And to do that, what do you suppose we're going to use?
Bellows.
A bellows is correct. Tell me when you're, I got to move over. We good? We good? We good? Good? Okay.
Yes.
I got nowhere to move over. Okay, clearing it. Clear. Oh yeah, we're at number 4. Number 4 uses a bellows. Filled with nitrogen. And of course that bellows filled nitrogen, nitrogen filled bellows is right in the airstream of upper deck pressure. So nitrogen in the airstream of upper deck. And movement of bellows. Will either bleed off oil from wastegate, which is, or block. All right, bleed off oil, that would be going to its normal position. It's normally open. Open is turbo off. Or block, which would be turbo on. Let me finish these 2 points. We can go and break. As temperature increases, air is less dense. Oops, as temp increases, air is less dense. So bellows expands. Blocking off oil. Wastegate closes. That is
Turbo
on. And the opposite is true. As temperature decreases, I'll write that. As temp decreases, air is more dense. Yes.
As the temp increases, will that
Yeah.
If you're gonna turn the turbo on, it's at a higher temperature.
Hmm. But still, it's less dense, right? And that's his job.
Right.
That's what the other part's for.
That's the differential doesn't really sense that. So
Okay.
I believe, and I don't know everything about this, that now because you start worrying about, because you have a valid point, what's stopping the temperature from going too high, compressing too much, that the air gets so hot that it starts causing a problem with pre-ignition detonation. And I'm pretty sure, my opinion, that it's the size of the turbocharger. So the turbocharger is limited in size so that now it's spinning full speed and it can only compress so much, which is where we get in the critical altitude. We hit 19,000. This thing's spinning as much as it can. It's like, well, that's the best I can do. Air is more dense. Bellow contracts. Is that where I'm at? Bellows contracts and bleeds off oil. Wastegate opens. And turbo off. There we go. Okay.